Hi, my name is Clinton Rubin. I'm here to speak about mentoring as part of the Responsible Conduct and Research program here at Stony Brook University. I have the great privilege of serving as chair of the Department of Biomedical Engineering and director of the Center for Biotechnology. And I guess from my experience in being mentored and now having the responsibility of mentoring, I'd like to sort of share some of my perspectives of this burden or this opportunity for you as students. Living in the environment of academia is really, it's great fun. It's the greatest job in the world. I encourage you to pursue that path. But with that comes great responsibilities. You've heard a lot about this already in terms of things like plagiarism. So my role as mentor, if you listen to nothing else that I say today, you can't plagiarize. That's the take-home message here. So at the end of the day, I've already served my role as being a good mentor for you. But my real job here, I don't know if you're listening to this in the morning or in the afternoon, but my real job today is to talk about mentoring, the good, the dark side of it, and sort of your role as an advisor and your expectations, your reasonable expectations of your own advisor as they're sort of guiding you through your scientific career. So starting out with these slides, and my son is just teaching me how to use PowerPoint, so I have lots of fun cartoons and slides as I go through this. It really comes down to, with you as a student, being advised one way or the other, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Should you push this experiment forward? Should you hold back and change directions, et cetera, et cetera? You're going to get advice one way or the other, and you sit there and wonder about, does this guy even know what he's talking about? So here, the devil, being the mentor themselves, someday going to be you, and maybe even by the end of this little talk, you will be the mentor. The whole idea is you are there as a mentor, as a guide, a teacher, a friend, an advocate, et cetera, and that's what we're going to touch on today. So, I've had the great pleasure of advising many, many graduate students and undergraduate students through the years. And this is probably how you feel, the idea that you're cheap labor in a lab, in a big factory. And, in essence, there's some truth to that, we as faculty and departments, we look to graduate students to be skilled and motivated hands to move our experiments forward. But you really need to sort of push yourself beyond that limitation and start to think of yourself as a colleague, a scientist, a colleague to the person down the counter from you, or even a colleague to your advisor. You can tell them that I said that. This is in contrast, of course, to probably how you think faculty look at you. You're sitting there working away. They come up, they steal your ideas, they work you to the bone, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Hopefully that's not really the case, but inevitably you're really going to think about it that way at some point in your career. So let's think about what being a mentor actually means. So this is actually an article published in the journal Science, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, not with the Simpsons in it. That was sort of my addition to it. But it's really funny because none of us really know what a mentor is. We don't really know what the attributes are and sort of what the failings of a bad mentor might be. But this paper was strange because their conclusions, and hopefully you can see them or see some of them, that the difference between a trained and an untrained mentor, sort of the parameters that were evaluated as good or bad, were things like they oriented you to the building. So maybe when you showed up as a graduate student at Stony Brook, a good mentor told you where the bathroom was, and a bad mentor, told you, to get out of his or her office. I don't know. But in essence, there is this big element of what your responsibilities are. How do you actually give good advice to students? So really, and I think sort of one of the key points of this talk is, even though you and I may disagree on what being a good mentor is, you cannot escape your responsibility to become a mentor. So this is sort of a gray area, plagiarism, where we started. It's black and white. You can't do it. But the attributes of being a mentor are really up to you to decide. And hopefully some of the things that we talk about here will stimulate you to either argue or disagree with me or say, Clint, that's a good point, and I think that I'm going to consider that a little further. Bottom line, you got to become a mentor, and you're going to be mentored, so what should your expectations be? So what is a mentor? Here we have a pretty old vase, depending on your viewpoint, and in essence, it's Polyphemus being blinded by Odysseus. And why is this clown up on a stage showing us in responsible conduct and research Odysseus? But there is actually a reason. And if any of you are out in the audience, because nobody's here right now, I'd ask you to raise your hand if you actually knew why Odysseus was up here. But just as an aside, what do you think a mentor actually is? And here I've answered the question for you, because you're being a very unresponsive audience, that you've got an advisor, a teacher, a guide, an advocate, a colleague, a friend, all these sort of warm and fuzzy things. You think, wow, I want to grow up and I want to be really a great mentor and I'm going to be a real friend to everybody that comes by. That's not always the only attribute you should consider being a mentor. There's a whole element of tough love. There's the element of saying, you need to sort of wake up and smell the coffee, as it were. So here's the hint. Again, I would ask you, but I'm still getting nobody to raise their hands. This is actually, anybody know? This is actually Telemachus, who's Odysseus' son. So when Odysseus went off on his long voyage, he left his son there, Telemachus, under the umbrella and guidance of mentor. And so the word mentor comes from this whole teacher, advocate, friend, but in essence, an experienced and trusted advisor, right? That's what really mentoring really means. So you may have great friends. I'm going to guess that if you really had long friendships, they've given you bad advice and you've gone out drinking too long and that sort of thing. Probably not someone that you would think of as the best advisor that you've ever had, but I would argue that being a friend and being a mentor are not necessarily synonymous. In essence, it's somebody who's going to help you along a wild and twisted path. So when you think of Odysseus, think of mentor, think of Telemachus, the son that he left behind. So when you think of a mentor, you got to sort of think back. Think of your teachers that you had as undergrads, at wherever you were in college, and try to wonder about, gee, I want to be an academic just like him, or, she went into industry and she's really my role model. That's who I want to be. So you have to ask yourself, what is it about these people that really sort of turned you on to, let's say, going into academics or pursuing a career in graduate school or the biomedical sciences? And you could sit there and say, well, they really showed a lot of passion, or they really had a lot of power, or they're really influencing health and outcomes with their science. So again, in your sort of thought experiment, as you're sort of drifting through this video, thinking about all those sort of attributes, but you also got to remember that, was it Spider-Man's dad, I think, said, or uncle, sorry, that, with power comes great responsibility. I don't know if that was who that was, but I think it was Spider-Man's uncle. And you've got up here, you've got my favorite cartoon character, the Grinch. He's powerful, he's smart, he's creative, et cetera. But we don't think of him necessarily as being a warm and fuzzy. But up at the top, for all you New Yorkers, or all of those of you sort of vested, see all your savings disappear, you got Bernie Madoff, right? I mean, the guy's got wealth, right? Or he had wealth anyway. He's got a lot of visibility and recognition, et cetera, et cetera. Is that something that we would think as worthy of aspiring to be? Probably not. I mean, I don't think you'd want to be him now. Donald Duck's uncle, whose name escapes me because I'm getting too old to remember all my favorite cartoon characters, is Uncle Scrooge, right? So you got Uncle Scrooge in the middle. All he was worried about was money and power and wealth, right? Is this something that you want to think about when you go into the biomedical sciences? Again, it's that whole balance. where your view of the world becomes very important. And then at the bottom, a real sort of horror show in science where fabricating data, which you have already seen or about to see videos on, another serious no-no. It's very exciting to get cool data and you see all these data points you wish that weren't there. You can't just erase them, right? And this, of course, is the stem cell biologist from Korea, South Korea, that was basically unmasked as being a fraud. He's ruined for life and will be, the butt of jokes and, the content of mentoring videos for years to come. So it's up to you to determine what it is that you value as important in the people that are advising you. So let's try to think about this. I don't know if you can see the caption down here. The provost here at this university gave me this cartoon. I'm not really sure I really ever understood why. But the caption says, never ever think outside the box, which of course is kind of clever when you're thinking about a cat. But with you as graduate students, I mean, this is the greatest opportunity you will ever have to think outside the box. It is the most fun you will ever have as being a scientist, as being a graduate student. You're not tied down to car park committees or curriculum committees or that sort of serving on study sections, et cetera. Man, if you don't like what you're doing now, you're in the wrong business, because being a graduate student is just the best. So your advisor, whoever it is that you've got or you're thinking about signing up with, this is somebody who shouldn't be treating you like a technician. This is somebody who should really be stimulating you to think creatively. And you should be excited and passionate about this, because hopefully this is what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, right? So mentor's advisor, pretty easy, right? Mentor is a teacher. I mean, we think of teachers as people who really sort of stimulate us to think about new disciplines, et cetera. One of, I will say, history's great teachers, of course, is from Star Wars. You probably already recognize the evil senator. But in essence, you got to think about your role models as somebody who's influencing you so much that you're really at risk of becoming that person. Not that you would necessarily be cloned to become your mentor, but the taste that you get in that laboratory is something that you will probably spring eternal in your own labs or in your own mentoring responsibilities. So you really have to have the judgment as you think about, oh, this person's really good, or this person, is really sort of supportive this way, or I saw that guy, cooking data. I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. And in essence, just as you might expect, the great teacher and the great student, in the end, as I say, you sort of have a tendency to become that person. And those of you, particularly the reproductive biologists in the crowd or the plant biologists in the crowd, are familiar with the term seed to seed to seed, that here in this case, this is my son about a few years ago. That is not me, although some of my students think that that's me. But in essence, that you learn from your mentor. Some of those attributes that you really value are things to promote, but things that you necessarily don't respect, again, it's up to you, your judgment, to decide whether you are going to take those into your own career. So you as teacher, and I mean this quite literally, because as graduate students, ideally you'll be in a position to mentor undergraduates in your lab, right? That you don't think of them necessarily as competitors or pains in the neck, et cetera, but you think of this as your opportunity to sort of test the waters as being a mentor. And then as you advance as a graduate student, you're going up this supposed hierarchy and becoming more and more senior and heading to being a postdoc or a junior faculty member. Those people around you are going to be looking to you to give you advice. Gee, Clint really is cranky and his door is closed. Should I go see him? And you as a graduate student say, well, just knock on his door and see. And this is really sort of this fundamental elementary advice you start to give out. And if you basically turn around and say, get out of my face, I got, an abstract due in 2 days, that's probably not being sort of the warm and fuzzy person that you could be. So your responsibility as a mentor starts immediately. All right, student teaches student. In essence, you're working with some volatile chemicals or some infectious agents or whatever at the benchtop. The undergraduate down the counter doesn't have his or her lab glasses on. You, of course, have your lab coat and your lab glasses on. See, it's my role of being a good mentor, that you're turning around and saying, hey, you should put on your safety glasses, and you should take those responsible conduct and research videos, and you should take them seriously, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the picture. You start taking shortcuts in your science. You start throwing out data points. The people in the lab think, oh, maybe that's okay. So you are now the role model. You are the advocate, and you are really what it's all about. This is another cartoon from the New Yorker. I don't know if you can see it. The door running into this guy's office, the label has been changed. I actually happen to be a bone physiologist, and someone has erased it and put down bone lab on the door. But the caption here says, oh, what the hell, I'll add another 0, which is hilarious when you think about it. But of course, as scientists, it's not something you do, right? So the funny thing about being a student in this sort of advisor, mentor capacity, where you are seeing the person who's supervising you, if you see this sort of tendency to stretch data or look away from bad data points, et cetera, it becomes really your responsibility as a mentor, even though that person is senior to you, to begin to engage them in conversation about this and really go to perhaps that person's supervisor to discuss about next steps, right? Nobody likes to be a rat fink, nobody likes to be a tattletale, but it is such a great privilege being a scientist, it is still your responsibility. It's not warm and fuzzy, it's the responsibility of being a mentor. Mentor as a guide, I'm sure you've all read Dante's Inferno. Here we've got the 9 rings of hell on the left, right? And we've got Virgil taking Dante by the hand and starting to bring him down into the dark underworld. You can see the graduate students with their feet pointed out of the ground in the steaming mud. I guess they haven't stopped for a coffee break at this point in time. But in essence, your mentor should be your guide. They should not be exploiting you. They should not be taking advantage of you as technicians, et cetera. They should be educating you and leading you through your decisions as a career, just as you will be doing for your undergraduates, or, as I said, as you sort of bubble up through the whole world of academia. I've summarized it here on the left. You can think of the rings of hell as things like their qualifying exam, first ring of hell, proposal defense, doctoral defense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way through grants and finally getting tenure where you sort of pop out the bottom and you head to the paradise. It's not really quite true. You end up on more car park committees, but still it's worth the effort. So again, not that being an academic or a graduate student for that matter is living through hell, but think of it as basically it's a journey. And think of the poem Ithaca. It's all about the journey. It's not about getting there. It's about the journey itself. Just the same, you got to be sure that you trust your mentor's sense of direction. I also have always had cartoons, more often than not, Far Side cartoons on my door. Somebody actually popped in CTR, my initials, over the devil as I'm giving advice, I guess, to students, which I guess is sort of a form of affection of some sort. I've never actually had the courage to do handwriting analysis of that. Okay. So now you got all these great successes going on. You're being a good mentor. You see your undergraduate that you're supervising submit their first abstract to this meeting or maybe to the Eureka, et cetera, et cetera. But you can't look away either, because your responsibility as a mentor is really sort of helping your mentees deal with failures or deal with failed experiments. My advice to you would, data doesn't really lie. The real issue is, were you asking the right question? But just the same, don't let somebody collapse into a wet puddle, of data because they think they're failures as scientists. Really help and support them. I know that you would be happy to have someone be supportive of you in those times when your experiments don't work, just as I would look to you as being a good mentor if you were working in my lab group, that you would help the group, the organism of the lab, survive. Okay, an advocate. Now this is kind of funny, the word advocate. What has a mentor got to do with advocacy? Remember the journey. You're first-year graduate students now. You're thinking, what am I going to do when I grow up? I want to go do a postdoc, here or there. I want to apply for faculty jobs or want to get my master's degree and go off into industry. That's all fine and good, and maybe law school, maybe medical school, who knows? The point is you always need your mentor's support in doing this. Invariably, as you apply for jobs, people will want to do letters of reference, they'll want phone interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So if basically you become remote to your mentor, or you basically do nothing but irritate them for a good or bad cause, it will come back to haunt you. And this is all about making sure you have open communication with your mentor, and when you are mentoring, that you actually have good open channels of communication to those who are your mentees. Because ultimately, you have got to advocate for the people that you mentor, and your mentor has a responsibility to advocate for you as you're applying for jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So now that it seems perhaps obvious that, of course, what he's talking about is letters of reference, et cetera, the message to you as students is that if you're having trouble communicating with your mentor, your advisor, or there's friction there, I got news for you. It's not going to get better. Your mentor, your faculty advisor is probably a very busy person, writing grants. They get pressure from people like me to write more grants or publish more papers, et cetera. If you think that they're necessarily going to come to you, it's a presumption on your part. You have to take some burden of responsibility of opening channels of communication with that person, right? Because there's nothing worse than applying for a job and getting a letter of reference, which is basically where you're being damned by faint praise. It's very, very competitive to get an academic or an industry job. If you get some sort of wishy-washy letter from your mentor, it's over. So try to heal the relationship now if the communication is poor, or if the relationship is good, try to build it up. I'm not suggesting inviting the person out for a beer or anything like that. I'm not suggesting you have to be the best friend of your mentor, but to make sure that there are open channels where you can talk about failed experiments or new ideas, et cetera, should be a real exchange. Right? So ultimately, when you're applying for a faculty position, you're going to need a letter of reference from your thesis advisor. Maybe even when you come up for tenure. There are lots of grants programs in NSF, National Science Foundation, and also National Institutes of Health, NIH, which actually require letters of references from your supervisors, fellowship programs, Lucille Markey, Pew Charitable Trust, et cetera, it's key that you have a good relationship with your mentor, because if they write that, well, this person's very distant, or this person doesn't communicate well, or you don't really know what they did in the lab anyway, it's really, a lot of that burden falls on you. And I don't know, it's just kind of a cool cartoon, I thought. So we got the guard on the left has just speared the king, which of course means, it's good to be king and all that. But chances are the king is not writing a big letter of support for the guard. Mentor as friend, I've touched on this a little bit. You want to be able to make sure that you trust your mentor, and that mentor trusts you, just as you would want that same relationship with the undergraduates or maybe the other graduate students in your lab. You don't want to be competitive. Try to share reagents when you can, but make sure that the reagents aren't contaminated from sloppy work, et cetera, et cetera. But trust is really, really essential. I'm going to sort of touch back just for a second. I realize I'm being somewhat redundant. This whole issue of making sure your advisor is your best friend. You know, that doesn't really sort of win a lot of stars with me. Maybe it works for some, but you know, I personally, I think I drive my students very, very hard. And if something is going awry or off path, I want to be sure that I can speak to them in a way that they really understand my job and just sort of the tough paternal kind of way that I may be in my own lab group. It's harder if you're, you know, hanging out at John Harvard's drinking beers all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You know, I like going there every now and then. You can take me out sometime. But just make sure that you understand what your advisor's relationship is first and foremost, which is to advise and guide you. Mentor as colleague. This goes back to this issue of reagents. You know, your lab mate or your bench mate, whether or not they're the same, advised by the same mentor, you know, space in a university is very, very crowded. You know, try to engage them, right? They may be a senior postdoc who has some tricks of the trade that can really help you, an undergraduate that's going to be, you know, some rocket scientist someday and you know, may help you with your own research. But to try to really be distant or asocial in a lab environment sometimes can actually contaminate the whole lab. And I'm guessing that if you are sort of a schmuck in the lab environment, that you may find yourself being isolated just as you had hoped or your intention, but that whole advocacy process begins to crumble. You know, your mentor's letter will be, well, very, very smart, but a bit on the alienating side. You're dead on arrival. It's over. Okay, I'm going to actually disappear off screen and I'm going to try to start this movie just because I love the movie and it's very fun. The whole idea of what collaboration and actually means and misunderstandings. I've played this movie millions of times. The actual collision was a bit of an accident, but in the end, I think it was sort of overinterpreted. So try as a mentor and as an advocate and as a mentee to try to give your colleagues the benefit of the doubt. Science is very complicated. Science is becoming more and more interdisciplinary. You need the brain power of this sort of syncytium of students and postdocs, et cetera, to move your stuff forward. Don't work alone. All right, in summary, this is sort of my take on mentoring. I return to where I started, which is this is a very, very gray area. There's no right way to be a mentor. There's no wrong way to be a mentor. I can guarantee you, well, I think I have students that really, really like me and think I'm a great mentor, and I'm sure that there are many students, raise your hands, oh, I don't see anyone raising their hands, that think that I'm a really bad mentor. But again, it's really up to you to decide what you value in that whole mentoring relationship. And my goal here was not to tell you how it should be, but really to recognize, I think, your responsibility, your expectations of your mentor, your expectations of your advisor, but also your new responsibility is now being a graduate student of being a mentor yourself. So really accentuate the things that you think are positive, you know, intelligence, creativity, integrity, and maybe, you know, downplay sort of, you know, my hidden goal of becoming a billionaire or something. I mean, if it happens in biomedicine, it's great, and I'm sure it's well-deserved. But, you know, personally, I think that helping health and humanity is, you know, will get you into the paradise after all. And no, I'm not a religious person. So with that, I will sign off. Thank you very much for your attention, and feel free to contact me should you have any further questions.